And what's going on here is actually a nasty, nasty fraud case here, right? Nasty fraud case is going on here in Mississippi. Let me read the headline on Mississippi Today, who they actually, with Ann Wolf, they actually broke the story and put the text messages from Brett Favre out. Former Governor Phil Bryant helped Brett Favre secure welfare funding for USM, that's University of Southern Mississippi, volleyball stadium, text revealed, right? So what happened is, and this is a picture of the former governor after he threw some other guy under the bus for fraud a couple years ago, and he's pretty much claiming that he had nothing to do. This has been going on for a few years now, right? 2020, some people got caught up in this fraud scheme, and the governor was able to squeak his way out by saying, I didn't have anything to do with it. But back then, you know, a lady named Nancy New was actually arrested, right? And she was the department head. Oh, I'm sorry. She was the, let me find what her exact job was. She was one of the head people at the Department of Human Services in the state, right? So essentially, let me break down this whole scheme for you that they were running. So what was going on in Mississippi is that they had money in their TANF welfare program, right? And what they did was say, hey, we have this money over here. We're not giving it to the actual citizens. We are going to start funneling some of this money out of the TANF program and into our private businesses and into our friends' pockets, right? So that's what happened. Nancy New was actually arrested in 2020, and she was actually convicted of 13 felony charges, right? And as part of her plea deal or whatever, she decided that she would actually cooperate with the state against pretty much everybody else. Like she's an informant. She's a snitch now. Now, my main my main issue here is there's a lot of people involved with this scheme, right? I think 6 people were arrested back in 2020 as part of this whole thing, and then a few people are now in question, including Brett Favre and Phil Bryant. Those are new people that are in question now, right? My problem with the way this whole thing has been set up is, first of all, if these people were black, because they're at the top of Mississippi, they're not black. If these people were black, there would have been an effort to swiftly punish them, first of all, and give them the worst charges possible so that they can get the maximum time, because it would have been framed and would have been blasted everywhere that these black people, black politicians, elected officials, and appointed officials are stealing from poor people, literally, right? But the way this is being set up as not some organized crime ring. It's like an individual effort. Even though they're arresting multiple people at a time, they are not calling them an organized crime syndicate. It's like they're treating each one of them as individual criminals who just played a part and did their own fraudulent thing within this whole scheme. I don't like that. This is a RICO case, a federal RICO case, if I ever seen one. And I don't understand why it's not, because the money that they were taking and funneling to Brett Favre specifically comes from the TANF program, right? And the TANF is federally funded. Since it's federally funded, and since they they straight up came up with a plot and a scheme to steal that money and use it for purposes other than what it was meant for, that should be a federal crime that the federal government should be investigating and charging them for and indicting them and charging them for. This should be a RICO, and there's multiple people that worked with them to come up with this plot. So what happened was, first of all, let me just read this. Nonprofit leaders had misspent at least $77 million in funds that were supposed to help the needy, right? So I know a lot of people have been hearing this $5 million number because $5 million went to Brett Favre specifically, but this was a $77 million fraud scheme. So it was massive, right? So how you get this much going on? You have this many moving parts. You have this much organization, and it's not a racketeering case, right? And these are federal funds, so this should be a federal case. So let me just tell you about the part where Brett Favre was involved. So in 2017, I guess Brett Favre approaches the school, University of Southern Mississippi, and says, hey, I think you guys should build a new stadium, new volleyball arena, new volleyball stadium, right? They're like, hey, that would be nice, but we don't have the money for it. So Brett Favre was like, okay, well, how about y'all put me in charge of raising the money, and you put me in charge of raising the money, I'll figure that part out. And then once I get the money, will y'all build it? They was like, okay, cool. So what he did was he hit up his buddies at the top of Mississippi's political structure. He hit them up and said, hey, is there any way you guys could help me fund this volleyball arena that I'm trying to build at my daughter's school? Yes, his daughter went to the school. That's why he had a vested interest in getting them new facilities. He said, okay, do you guys have any way you can get me some funding? These people took it upon themselves, his friends took it upon themselves to say, you know what? We will find a way to circumvent the laws and regulations of the federal government to make it look like on paper that we are legally giving this school money or giving this money to Brett Favre for his cause. Right? So what happened was, this is what the scheme that they came up with. They were going to use TANF money for a program that supposedly has a volleyball gym or arena that is used for families in Mississippi, right? So what they did was the school leased out their property to a athletic foundation for $1, right? And then that athletic foundation then leased the facility to the state of Mississippi for $4 million, right? So this was just some type of like shelter scheme, like a work through. So it was $1 to this foundation, then it was $4 million to the state. So then the state was paying this foundation $4 million for the lease, but really that money was being used then for construction. The federal government specifically has a rule that says TANF money cannot be used on brick and mortar construction, right? That's the reason that they had to use that middleman company, the foundation, for a lease, right? So these people specifically came up with this scheme to get around federal regulations so that they could get this money to Brett Favre so he can get this building built at the school. So so they got them $4 million sent over, right? Then what happened was the school said, hey, this is good, but this is about a $5 million job. So we won't sign off on any of it until we have all of the money in our bank account, right? So Brett Favre says, okay, we got to come up with a new way to get another $1 million. So then Brett Favre sits back on his own and comes up with this idea. Hey, governor, or he hit up Nancy New and said, hey, what if you guys pay me $1 million to advertise this new volleyball arena that we're leasing to the state? What if y'all pay me to advertise it, right? They said, that's a good idea. They all agreed. This is an amazing idea. We just pay Brett Favre for advertising, and then he'll just funnel that money back to the school. So what they did was they cut him a check for $500,000. Then they cut him another check for $610,000. So that's, if you've been hearing about this $1.1 million that Brett Favre paid back or whatever, that's what that was from. That was from them paying him for advertisement when really that money went to the building of that school. So again, when I say these people are co-conspirators, and when I say these people came up with an elaborate scheme to defraud the government and to defraud the taxpayers of Mississippi, that's what they really did. And they came up with this and they actually executed. They went through with it and they got it done. Millions of dollars funneled to this school for them to build this thing. Now, I feel like, how in the world is it possible that Brett Favre could be seen as anything other than somebody who knowingly defrauded the government? He knew that he was contacting some people. He even asked in a text message, if you were to pay me, is there any way the media can find out where it came from and how much? So he knew something was wrong because he knew that he wanted to keep this thing private. And these are the text messages, the bombshell text messages that just came out, right? So he knew that he was circumventing some type of ruling, some type of regulations. So why is he not being treated the same way as any other fraud criminal? You know, a lot of people are like, oh, they don't want you to bring up race, but how could you bring up anything other than race in a situation like this? It doesn't make sense. This lady Nancy, let me see here, right? This lady Nancy New is actually a resident of Jackson, Mississippi. So while they were stealing 77, almost $80 million to just give to themselves and pocket the money, Jackson, Mississippi had been having infrastructure issues that they could have fixed. Have been having infrastructure issues that at least could have been held off for now with a few $1,000,000. They could have got new pumps a while ago. They could have tried to get some of the lead out of that water a while ago. They could have cleaned up some of that sewage that spilled in that water last year a while ago. But instead, they decided, nope, that money would be better spent outside of Jackson. That money would be better spent actually by Brett Favre and his daughter's school. Right? And that's what they decided to do with that money. So, you know what? Y'all make sure that y'all pound the drum as loud as you can every time you see something referencing this story, like a link or anything like that, man, share it, amplify it, because these people are stealing millions of dollars and getting a slap on the wrist for it. So this lady being convicted of 13 felonies and stealing millions and millions of dollars from taxpayers and the federal government, she's not even being charged properly, and now she just gets to snitch on a couple other people that did far less than her. Even though Phil Bryant was a part of this scheme and Brett Favre was part of the scheme, Nancy New was the one stealing the most money. So why is she able to snitch on people to get out of trouble when she did the most frauding? It's crazy. Make sure y'all amplify this, man, because the people of Jackson need as much help as they can. And if they could take money to do stuff like that, they definitely could take some of that money and fix some water pumps. Okay?